the idea came to be and where memorial landscapes are in 2020. So I'm going to talk about some technical issues, how we do it, and then the fun stuff, just talking about the different plants. And as you're saying here, pushing up daisies, native grasses, lilies, and a lot of other stuff. If you're pushing up daisies, there's a good chance you could be pushing up Echinacea labiegata, which is a federally endangered coneflower. This is actually on a grave. I started propagating these more than 20 years ago when I owned Buzzard's Roost Mountain before it became the Buzzard's Roost Heritage Preserve. I owned it with an old girlfriend. Kimberly and her husband decided that we shouldn't own this piece of land together, so we changed the Buzzard's Roost Heritage Preserve. It's not native to the site, but within 3 miles of the locations, I think it's appropriate. This all started at Emory University in 1977. I was taking a human ecology course with another old girlfriend who was taking a death studies course at the same time. She insisted that I read this book, The American Way of Death, which was written in 1963. And interestingly, it talked about the $1 million acre in a cemetery, that each acre of a cemetery was worth, it was about $1 million worth of investment as far as people buying stuff to put into the ground. In the human ecology course I was taking at the time, we had the professor asked us to think about wildland finance. How do you buy land to do it? And that was my idea, was that, well, rather than burying 1,000, 1,200 people per acre, maybe we could bury fewer people per acre and save a lot of land. At the time, land around Westminster was less than $1,000 an acre. So that was, I thought that would be a pretty good lick. I thought about it for years, and then my dad unexpectedly died in 1995. He was a great guy. He's actually the one that found the property at Ramsey Creek. But he died in 1985 at age 54. And this is his grave at the Hopewell Cemetery outside of Westminster. It was goes back to 1830. My family's been buried there since then, the Pickens side of the family. My aunt, Marie Pickens, was on the cemetery board and really wanted this chain link fence. I'm not really sure why, whether this keep zombies in or what, but it bothered me that the time we could have spent with what we spent, even having the cemetery space for free and choosing a wooden casket, we still spent enough money to buy over 5 acres of land. And my dad loved the woods. He grew up in the woods. He was the one that found the property. He was a salesman. So I paid $43,000 for the house and 40 acres at the time with a quarter mile of creek frontage. We now have over 1 mile of creek frontage and 78 acres. And I always thought it would be a better memorial to him had we bought land someplace. By 1985, I was a life member of the Nature Conservancy, and in the 80s, TNC had a program that was identifying abandoned pioneer cemeteries in the Midwest. And these were some of the best examples of tallgrass prairie anywhere because it wasn't plowed. And some of these became the nidus of state parks. And I figured, well, if that could happen by accident, what could we do if we use conservation science and ecological restoration? So this went beyond, of course, the 1977 idea to really starting to think about it. Cautionary tale, as I was looking into this, the rural cemeteries of the early 1830s really were about creating nature, a natural area for people to have contemplative recreation. And really the first one in the United States was Mount Auburn, banks of the Charles River in Boston. And it was a big tourist attraction, the second biggest tourist attraction in the Northeast after Niagara Falls, because it was just this unique area. This is before Central Park and the big city parks, and people didn't have that kind of space, and they flocked to these areas. Tens of thousands of visitors a year. They had winding paths, and it was lots of natural area. And Mount Auburn is still quite beautiful, but just like Mount Auburn, Laurel Hill in Philadelphia, and Bonaventure in Savannah, and there were lots more, it was the tyranny of small decision. No one really thought what would happen in 200 years. And this is Laurel Hill on the Schuylkill River in Philadelphia. And we know in 1840 something, 40,000 people paid for tickets to go there because, again, you didn't have access to urban parks. And as you can see, there are now 70 something thousand monuments on 70 acres, 70 something acres. So it really was the tyranny of small decision. By the mid 1990s, I came up with I started thinking really seriously about how would you avoid this kind of problem and really create a real nature preserve. And conservation burial, these are the basic principles I came up with. Again, the land selection is important, position in landscape. Unless you're buying 500 acres, if you're only going to have 30 to 70 acres, it would be nice if it protected a stretch of creek or if it was close to another park, et cetera. The project in Atlanta with the Monastery of the Holy Spirit, where we worked on their 70-acre project, it helped leverage where they can actually save their whole 2,000 acres that they have in the Mount Arabia heritage area that runs along the South River. But the last thing, creating a multidimensional space, and multidimensional ecological and social space, is really important because the idea here is we're not really creating cemeteries. What we're doing here is using the burial function to protect the land and ecologically restore it. So we want to redefine what these spaces are. If you're in Charleston and you go to the Unitarian Church, they have this fantastic cemetery that's just wild out back, and it's intentionally so. But people probably don't say, let's go to the cemetery. They say, let's go to the church. So what we're trying to do is, it's a nature preserve that hosts burials, that helps finance it and gives it really a sense of place and creates a transgenerational constituency for that project. It can attract investment from people who would never give to a nature preserve. I do have a guy there, first guy who bought one of the first people who bought a place there. And he was on the opposite side of every conservation battle we had about the Forest Service, et cetera, et cetera. And I told him, I said, Charles, I'm really surprised you bought a space. And he said, well, Billy, look, he said, I love the woods. It's you environmentalists I don't like. So it really is it's a different kind of thing. And I think the other thing, it's very important that an outside entity holds the easement. And that entity should probably not have a financial interest in seeing us expand the number of people per acre, because you can see the next to last bullet is much lower burial density. In the original section, we only have about 50 per acre, where the modern cemeteries, we're talking 800 to 1,200 per acre. And then talking about how do we restore? What do we restore? And what are the steps? And it really having a fine scale botanical evaluation by a trained field botanist, preferably multi-seasonal. We got Chick Gaddy, who's a good friend of mine, to do it. I'm pretty good field botanist as far as it goes. I can recognize, I don't recognize what that is. I know how to look it up. But part of it is, what do you restore? What plants and habitats do we want to do? Let me find my place here. And again, we have introduced a few plants like echinacea that were site appropriate. We have other markers for prairie and erigium, rattlesnake master, all these other plants that are there. So we decided that part of this would be prairie. And also we developed excavation techniques. I mean, how do you open and close a grave and keep the soil horizons intact, and plant rescue, et cetera. We modeled part of it on pit mound topography. If you can see, there's a tree in the background there that blew over the storms. And if you go to old growth forests, they've done studies that show that almost every square foot is either a pit where the tree's gone up or a mound or both in the last 100 years. All right, so anyway, we thought we had all the bases covered. I really thought this out. We've gotten all the right advice. We did focus groups in Greenville. This would have been in early 1998, and it tested out pretty well. But it turned out to be a whole lot more controversial than we thought it was going to be, especially for Westminster, South Carolina. Rumors flew. They said that they thought we were going to feed bodies to the buzzards was a big one, that we're doing sky burial, or that we were throwing bodies into the creek. We had a little lady called up and said, "Are you the guys that are doing that thing on Ramsey Creek?" And we said, "Well, yes, we are." She said, "Well, stop what you're doing. Nobody wants to drink your old dead man soup," because she really thought we were throwing bodies into the creek. So at first I thought it was funny, but we started getting hate mail and hate letters, and a few patients moved their records. Although one guy told me, he said, "Well, you getting into the cemetery business is like a veterinary getting his taxidermy license and putting a sign in the window that says, 'Either way, you get your dog back,'" you know. So it was kind of fun, but it got serious. So the editor of the Westminster News was a friend of mine and patient, and she called and said, "Look, I know you got a problem, so I think you need a little rebranding. I've done some ad copy, and I thought you might be interested in this." That was her suggestion, that we rename it Buzzard Acres. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust, protein to bird poop, it's all the same to us. It was very clever. I thought, very funny, you know, but we decided not to do it. But things started rough. Finally, we got through that initial part. We moved a 1924 chapel there that was scheduled to be demolished, and people were very fond of it. It was a mile or two down the road, and they were going to push it over and burn it. So we moved it there, and so this, you know, the dream we had of this being this multi-dimensional space. We're going to have a lot of weddings and baby blessings. We had baby blessing. We had stories in the New York Times, Sierra Magazine, LA Times, NPR, CBS, NBC. The biggest break was AARP had it. We were supposed to be on the cover, but Ronald Reagan died and kicked us off the front of the cover. Maybe I shouldn't include that, but that's what they tell us, we were going to be on the cover, and then Ronald Reagan died, and so we weren't. But we had a very nice article, and we got tens of thousands of emails. We weren't really ready for it. At this point, we've had more than 600 interments and a lot more pre-need sales, and we've done consulting all over the country in the last 22 years, and helped almost every conservation project out there, from the Monastery of the Holy Spirit. There are a couple in Florida, Ohio, Washington State, really just all over. There's a Buddhist Sangha up in Asheville. So this year we formed the Conservation Burial Alliance as a 501c3. And we've just launched that. We've been meeting now for about 2 years, and I don't know if you guys know anything about organizing nonprofits, but you know, we had to actually have a talking pine cone where you couldn't speak unless you held the pine cone. It was consensus based. But we finally have an organization really to spread the word about the difference between plain green burial. A lot of the projects with the Green Burial Council, it's a contemporary cemetery with 2 acres off the back, and it's not really the core mission of a lot of these is not conservation of plants, but more providing just this other business. That's just one of our nice plants. We have actually last year we had a fantastic bloom of church caps. When we do excavation, it's all by hand. We found that heavy equipment caused way too much collateral damage, and even though our footprint is not that much as far as the acreage, we decided how can we further reduce it. So we developed a lot of the techniques that most people are using now. The grades are pretty shallow, 3.5, 4 feet, where the nutrients that we want to get back up into the living layer actually get back into the living area. There's a large mound at the end. Kimberly, by the way, came up with the grave decoration. She has a background in drama and said this is like a set. I dug the first grave, and I dug it 6 feet deep and 8 feet wide, and 4 feet wide and 8.5 feet long, and had this huge mound of dirt. And I was so proud of it. And she said, "It looks like bloody Verdun in World War I." She said, we can't not bury someone in just this hole in the ground. So she came up with this idea. And here's some other examples. That was actually a child's burial. And again, this is in our little prairie remnant that we burn on an irregular basis. And we're very careful to do plant rescue when we can, especially things that we can't replace. And of course, we always do a secondary survey and ongoing surveys where we don't dig up something that can't be moved, like a rare orchid, et cetera. Just a little word on cremation. I mean, a lot of those of us in environmental plant people talk about cremation, and we do take cremated remains, a lot of them, but we think it's the second best thing. It does use fossil fuels. It destroys nutrients that other life could use and turns them into air pollution, but it is a lot less expensive. My father-in-law was the groundskeeper at Ramsey Creek for years. He did all the mowing the paths and a lot of the carpentry and things. And he told me one day, he said, look, I really like the idea of green burial. He said, but I want half my remains to go to the coast of Wales, where I proposed to Babs, my mother-in-law, and I want half to be here. And he said, I suspect it would be rather tidy if we cremated me first. You know, then we don't have to decide who gets the bottom half. This is another Ramsey Creek picture in the spring. And if you guys haven't been to Ramsey Creek during Mount Laurel season, it really is absolutely gorgeous. And why do we have so many species at Ramsey Creek? We've got about 350 species on 78 acres now. And it is inner Piedmont, which is a biological crossroads from Ramsey Creek to the headwaters of our project to the headwaters in the National Forest in the Chaga Belt is only just a few miles. So you're right there at the edge of the mountains. So we have mountain species, we have coastal plain species, and Piedmont species. We have deep ravines, meadows, so a lot of different kinds of areas. And there are areas that have never been plowed. And I think that's an important deal because of we think of old growth as being old trees, but a lot of what's going on with old growth is really on the kind of the forb level, the understory, and under the ground, where all the different types of mycorrhizal associates are. In the UK, if it hasn't been cut and if it hasn't been plowed since 1600, so it's considered old growth. And of course, some of this has never ever been plowed. A lot of it has, and it's been abused, but there are areas on it that have never been plowed. And I think the other reason for the number of species is that we just continuously gone through this area and found more species as time's gone on. We've done a lot of upstream. We found some species that we thought were gone because there'd been a timber operation before we bought it, and it was just covered in privet. And we've done, gosh, hundreds of hours trying to get rid of privet. It's like rolling the boulder up the hill, but we're still doing it. And appropriate introductions such as smoothroot coneflower and ginseng. We have some other species, but those are two of the bigger ones that we've done. And of course, the creative destruction. Fire is absolutely critical for our meadows.
Clean up.
And it's a lot of fun. It's not near as much fun since our friend Richard Kane got his fire school training, so things don't get nearly as out of hand as they did years ago. It was kind of, we were careful, but not as careful as we should have been, I guess. But, and we do have to be careful now. We have infrastructure, et cetera. And I do want to make a kind of plea for Southeastern Grasslands. That's kind of one of my passions. It is arguably one of the most degraded and least represented ecotypes that we've got. A lot of those areas were plowed or turned into European grasses for livestock. And there have been some good studies that show even small patches like at Ramsey Creek Preserve have value. Again, fire is a necessary tool. And if you're not familiar with Dr. Dwayne Estes and the Southern Grasslands Initiative, he is doing great work on identifying. He's working with the highway department. Our South Carolina DNR has killed all sorts of beautiful prairie remnants because that's one of the places they've hung on in the past. In the last 5 to 10 years, they've gone to a heavy-handed herbicide deal, and the Southern Grasslands Initiative is working with Tennessee to identify those areas along their right-of-ways where they don't do it. I wish we could do that in South Carolina. And
hey,
again, this is a favorite, one of my favorite books. If you haven't read Reed Noss's Forgotten Grasslands of the Southeast, I would definitely do it. And we did have, it as it turned out, a lot of prairie plants at Ramsey Creek. No, I don't want to go to the cloudless. God, hang on. We do have a lot of prairie plants at Ramsey Creek. This is Manfreda. I think it's our only native agave. It is a succulent, and it's one of the things they call tuberose, and it does smell nice. But we have this growing down in the woods where it's completely overgrown with trees now. It looks like a great maturing forest, but you've got that underneath, so you know that it was open. And in fact, we went to the county records department and found that a good bit of Ramsey Creek was more savanna years and years ago. Unfortunately, my grounds guy now got confused and mowed down our main meadow this year. I wanted to mow down a small part that had some invasive goldenrod in it, but it is really important for the pollinators. And again, this is a quote from Thomas Merton. I think he might have been influenced by Lao Tzu, and that come from him. But this is the other thing, again, the reason why I think we have found so many plants is because we're just there. I'm there 3 days a week. We find something that we don't know. And here are a few of the plants that Chick Gaddy has managed to, after Chick Gaddy came in and found the original 200 and something, we found some very interesting plants. And that's got to be my favorite. I'd like to say I found it, but we were walking along one August and Kimberly said, "What is that?" And it's Hexalectrix spicata, which is the crested coral root. It is basically parasite by proxy. I don't think it has a specific host, like Indian pipes have Russula. Brevis has specific mushroom. Mycorrhizal associate that goes for Hexalectrix is a little more cosmopolitan as far as going into different plants. But you'll see it bloom one year in one place, and it might not bloom there again for several years, but it blooms in another place. This year I've not seen one, but last year we had a really good bloom in several different sites. But some years, for whatever reason, I don't really understand the ecology of it. You don't see it. But when I found this, and I told Chick Gaddy that I thought I'd found it. He thought, "Oh, you must have found cranefly orchid." I said, No. It really is. I sent him a picture, and he said, "Oh, you're right. It is Hexalectrix." And at that point, if you look at Radford, it's not in there in the 3 county. It wasn't in Oconee, Pickens, Greenville County. You see it down on the coast in shell middens, and it does seem to like calcium. And I mentioned this is a plant. It is a single cell plant, but it's an algae, Oophilia amblystomatis. And the reason I'm bringing it up, I just think it's so interesting that you can see some tiny little salamanders down in the lower part of the thing, and it's green. It's green salamander spawn. And this particular algae is found only with the spotted salamander, which is our state salamander. And it's thought that since it lays in vernal ponds, it has a pretty thick coating for salamander eggs. And if it gets dried out, the algae provide maybe even some food, but particularly oxygen. And then the little salamanders poop and feed the algae. The algae actually invades the cells of the spotted salamander in the skin. And I think the only other animals we know about are cicadas. In their gut have intracellular organisms living there and coral reefs. So this is a pretty interesting plant, and it's found only in conjunction with those. This is thought, I wasn't sure what this was. This blooms in October. When all the other liatris has gone, it's paler, and it just looks different. So I sent to Chick Gaddy, I said, what is this? So Chick was very, very nicely sent this to Guy Nelson at UNC in the flora of North America. He was the liatris guy, and he thinks that, he said, it's closest to, he said, probably elegantula, which has not been seen in South Carolina, at least in the Piedmont. It's a coastal plain species, more down in Florida and even South Georgia, but it's been moving. They've been finding sightings north, but it may be a new record for our area. But the problem with liatris, I'll just say ahead of time, is it's a really tough genus. There's a lot of hybridization, and a lot of phenotypic plasticity depending on the soil types and everything else. But this is definitely different, and probably is elegantula, which is, I'd never even heard of it. Of course, Chick missed our southern nodding trillium. I think it was just the wrong season when it was up there, which is relatively rare. We have hundreds of these in the upper part, what we call the new bit at Ramsey Creek that we bought a few years ago along the creek. And Trillium discolor, which while called rare, is locally abundant. We have hundreds, if not thousands of these. They grow pretty well from seeds. And this is barren strawberry, Walstinia frankroides. Anyway, it's the barren strawberry. I told you I'd mangle a name or two. I believe this is the white version of blue-eye grass, which is probably a different species, Sycentium albidium. And if you look at it side by side with the other, the angustifolium, the narrow leaf, is smaller and obviously blue. So I think this may be the albinium. And then last year I found some rose pink, which is also a coastal plain species growing in our wetland, which is Sabatia angularis is what Chick thinks is angularis, and I think that's probably right looking back at it. Anyway, those are the new plants we found within the last several years. And there's Ramsey Creek in the spring. Again, that's before everything comes out, but it is a nice walk. We do have like I said, a mile along the creek. We're trying to put a trail in some of the steep bit, but so you have, at some point you have to leave the creek for 100 yards or so. And one of my favorite plants, I just like pedicularis, lousewort. That's where I first learned about sonication or buzz pollination. I didn't realize almost 10% of plants have buzz pollination, including a lot of ericaceae. I think mountain laurel has buzz pollination. Basically, the honeybees cannot pollinate this because it has to have the buzzing at a certain frequency, and the pollen is in a tube that either has little slits in it or a hole in the end, and it adheres pretty closely until you get the right frequency of buzzing, and then it releases the, kind of blows the pollen out. It looks like a little bird beak, and that puts it on the bumblebee's back, but it's bumblebees pollinate this. Pedicularis is also, they reclassified it. It's now considered an Orobanchaceae, which is, there are a lot of parasites in that. Aurelaria, I think, is, and several others. They're either parasites or partial parasites. This obviously has chlorophyll, but it's parasitic on grasses, and they have used this in grassland restorations to control aggressive grasses where the grasses don't take completely over. So it does have this role in restoration. Of course, and this is black cohosh, which the plant formerly known as Semisophaga racemosa, which I like saying a lot better than Actaea, or having someone can help me with that. Actaea racemosa, but it's not a Semisophaga. They did genetic studies and they've reassigned it. This famously was used in medicines like Lida E. Pickham's vegetable compound, which was for women's GYN disorders, but it can be potentially toxic. And this is another one of our liatris. We have 3 species of liatris, including the alligatrum. Yeah, and someone can help, but this may be squarulosa or squarosa. I'm not sure though. It's deep maroon. This is a pretty small plant. That's actually larger than life size, and it grows in our meadow, kind of over thin soils. It's a very pretty plant, but it doesn't get certainly not more than a foot high. And then this plant, which I actually used to grow on the road cut between Ramsey Creek and Westminster, but I collected from there's some nice prairie remnants in the national forest near Cedar Creek Road. There's some really nice ones where they've done burning. That's 6 feet tall. And I was thinking it was spicata, but again, I might have it wrong. These are really tough. They're great for butterflies, beautiful plants. We have whether this is just site specific and, like I said, phenotypic plasticity. We have other ones that I collected that aren't nearly this robust, but I planted these in an area where we cut down the brush because there were a lot of prairie plants there at the edge of the existing grassland, and where we had our burn pile. So there's a lot of ash, I guess, there. So I don't know if this was just a response to the ash or what. And of course, we just have a few other, like Spigelia, wormroot. We have tons of this. This was over collected in the early 20th, late 19th century as a worm medicine. And in fact, the rather awful name for such a pretty plant is wormroot, but it apparently was pretty effective against worms. And of course, Catesby's trillium, toad trillium. I think it's cuneatum. And then recently, I found a couple years ago, I found these. Chick had told me he thought they were there, but I could never find them. And there's a little on the lower granite shoals. There's a little seepage, and how it's not been washed away over the year with all the floods, I don't know. But this is a little green orchid. Venus, and there's some thought that it might be some kind of nectary for insects, or maybe it was a holdover from back when it was not self. I think they look like little angels. That was my take on it. But we have a patch of these. I think they're really. And then okay, showy orchis. Some people call it showy orchid, but my understanding is that the tuber looks like a testicle, so it's orchis for that, not orchid. But you look if you Google it, you'll see showy orchid all over the place, but it really is showy orchis. And of course, Indian cucumber, leather flower, which I really love. It's all over the place upstream, and actually, the more we looked, the more we found it. It's a nice vine for the garden, and it does grow well from seed. I've grown this from seed, but it's I'm blanking on the clematis last name, the second name, but it is a clematis. Storax, which I think is also an underappreciated tree with potential for landscape. It's got a very contorted limbs, and it forms clones. you'd see a quarter acre and it might all be the same plant. But it has a very nice smell. It has these kind of flowers that look a lot like a tomato, but it's not Solanaceae at all. So, but I think it's underappreciated. We've actually moved some of these where it's growing out into the trail. You'll get where it's where we cut and everything. It'll sprout, and they're pretty easy to propagate from root to root. Just digging up a plant that's coming out in this clone and then putting it in a bucket and it sprouts. And we've actually put some of these on graves as well. In fact, I think that is actually on a grave at Ramsey Creek. But anyway, that's what I've got. Got any questions?
Yeah, we do have some questions.
Okay, great.
We lost a little bit of that video along the way.
Probably the storm. It's probably the storm we're having. I can go back if there's something you wanted me to.
Well, the current picture, I missed the name of it. I'm guessing it's Styrex or.
It is.
Okay. So one of the questions we're mentioning, I think maybe you must have mentioned it. They were wanting to see a picture of the Charleston Cemetery. If they were interested in that, and then I think somebody else commented on the same thing, that it was off of King Street, and somebody else gave an address of 4 Archdale Street in Charleston. But the Unitarian Cemetery in Charleston was a must-see thing. Are you familiar with that, Billy?
Yeah, that's the one I was actually talking about. You can get to it either way. You can get it from King Street, and you go off especially in the summer, it's really hot, and it's all the bricks and everything, and you go in this little side thing, and it takes you right to the cemetery, or you can come out from the other side, from the next street over, and then go behind the church. But yeah, it's beautiful.
Okay, and another question is, how are the visits to the grave sites handled for the families?
We're open from dusk to dawn, and we just ask people not to decorate or plant things without our permission. And that has been a problem over the years, where someone will say, they'll plant English ivy and say, well, I know it's native because it was in Granny's yard. I say, well, no, it's not. So we have to, and we'll dig them up and give them back to the family and say, but we do have these plants. If you want to plant something, and we've got some really nice plants to plant. We try to locally source all of our plants. The ferns we get from Long Creek fern grower, who grows everything from spores. And then we've used, there's a native plant nursery over in Anderson. But we also, a lot of stuff comes up in the trails. So every year we'll walk up the trails and take these plastic grocery bags if people have them. And those are pretty convenient to dig stuff up out of the trail and then grow them out in buckets usually. Sometimes if it's the right time of year, we'll put them directly on graves. But we've gotten a lot of plant material just from our trails. You've got bare earth or trampled down earth. And so we rather than weed eating everything and having it trampled, we've moved a lot of plants over the years.
Okay, and then another question is, what's the usual procedure for taking the body for burial? They know you provide the digging, but what else?
Well, and I should have had a picture of it. I almost put it in there. We bought an Amish burial cart. An Amish guy built a design over 100 years old, and it's hand drawn. And so we get the pallbearers to help us. It's got a handle, just like a kid's wagon. It's got a handle in the front, and it's got sides, and so it's a beautiful piece of kit. And we take the body down to the gravesite with that. It doesn't have brakes, and there's quite a bit of relief, so we have to coach the pallbearers. Their job is not to let the cart get out of control. We don't have crashing down. But we get the body there. It can be either in a shroud, or a lot of people do pick shrouds these days, or a plain pine box. There's a couple over in Pendleton that use repurposed recycled wood to make caskets, and they do a really good job. And we also have people who just want to be buried directly. We had one lady from South Florida that says she came in the world naked and wanted to be buried naked. but her grandchildren vetoed the idea, but she was naked inside of a sheet because we said, yeah, that they didn't want the naked thing. So, but we've had a number of people just buried in their clothes. The monks in Atlanta are buried in their vestments, and we learned a little bit from them that if you're burying someone directly into the ground like that, you put a cloth over the face, because it's very difficult to fill a grave in and throw dirt in someone's face. Even they're not there, but it was a bit of an impediment. So we did learn a little bit from the monastery, the Holy Spirit, how to bury a body just in street clothes, because there are people who have requested that.
Mm-hmm. I remember at my visit there, you were talking about how the upper layer has all that those mycorrhizums in it, and that you replace that in the very same location it came out of. You might have mentioned that, but I think I might have missed it.
Yeah, that was one thing where I talked about keeping the layers intact, but I think that's really, really important, because we've seen projects where they just get a backhoe and everything comes out and everything's mixed up, and that's really not the way to do it. In our woods, that duff layer with all the roots and things you can cut it just like turf, and we cut it in strips. And then of course the grave is convex, and so it's got a bigger surface area, so we'll often try to go around the sides to stabilize the mound where you don't get stuff going sideways, but we'll try to put a little bit up top where all that stuff stays there. But I think it really does a better job when you're transplanting stuff onto the grave.
Okay, there. Another question was, how much space between graves?
Well, it depends. If it's a couple, or a family, and they all want to be buried together, and it's an appropriate place for that, they can be side by side. But again, the overall density, we don't grid. Okay, gridding is a technology when you're trying to maximize the number per acre, and it's before we had good GIS, GPS technology. And if you're doing low density burials, you really don't need that. You can GPS the grave in. So we're not everybody doesn't get the same amount. We have kind of density nodes, places that have been, maybe it was no logging deck, it was something else, but there's just not that many plants there. You can bury a lot of people. In grasslands up at the top, we've been burning that on an irregular basis since 1986, I guess. And when we were moving the church, the guy who was made the little road for us to go down there said, "Look, I didn't want to mess your fescue up, so I dumped all that debris in that old field." It was this huge bunch of debris, so we had to burn it. We lost that whole thing down to the ground layer. Of course, there we can bury more people per acre. So what we have is we have clusters of graves. It's not a gridded where everything's evenly spaced, because that's just not the way the land is. I mean, we try to listen to the land. Where we have those hexalectrus, we really can't. We got to be very careful, because you dig that stuff up and it's gone. So we can't really. In that area, it's very low density. In other areas, it's higher density. And people can, if it's a couple or a family and they want side by side, then that's fine with us.
How about the regulations about the proximity of a grave to a creek or spring or other water sources?
Yeah, there's not really in South Carolina. North Carolina is very, very specific. South Carolina is a little more loosey-goosey. Having said that, we think we have with Upstate Forever, I think we're 50 feet back from any water. Now, what you got to remember, though, there's a cattle operation upstream. And so, each cow, every time it takes a poop and it's not fenced out, you put in a lot more E. coli than you're ever going to see from a dead body. Yeah, and most people don't get their water from wells anyway. But Ramsey Creek was an impaired stream. I think it's in better shape now than it was, but it had a pretty high fecal coliform count as it entered Ramsey Creek. So when we bury people, 50 feet from the water. How long does it take for that to percolate through all the layers? And how do you clean water? I mean, part of it is going through clay, et cetera, if you look at how water treatment is done. So, and most of the graves would not outcrop into the creek. They would outcrop into the little spring kind of that goes into the creek. So we feel like, if anything, that the water is cleaner when it leaves Ramsey Creek, with all the aeration and everything, that we're not contributing in any way to a water quality issue.
Okay. Do you encourage burial shrouds that are impregnated with mycorrhiza?
That there's a woman who, she got an awful lot of attention. She got the big TED. I had a TEDx talk in Greenville a few years ago, and but she got invited to the big TED, the big one, the real TED, and she got, over 1 million views right away with her mushroom suit. The problem with that is you're impregnating it with witch mycorrhiza, and we have tons and tons of mycorrhiza anyway. So we don't want to introduce. And she was using wood fungus, which will not survive when you bury it. And she said she did an experiment where she put her hair and nails into a box in her apartment. I guess they wouldn't let her put a dead possum in her apartment. But keratin is not broken down. They have no enzymes to break down keratin. So she was a very sweet person and a dynamic thing. But the mushroom soup, I think, is a complete failure. What we do is we take sticks that have been on the forest floor for more than a year, and we put those sticks into the grave. Those are impregnated with all the mushroom spores and everything, we presume. And it also creates microchannels similar to roots. So we think that's probably a better way of introducing both kind of microchannels for water percolation, also oxygenation of the body, which increases the chance that you're going to decompose quickly and not form what's called grave wax or adipocere, which can stay there forever. We don't want to fossilize people. We want them to go back to the living layer. And these what we call burial sticks, I think, do a better job of that than a suit impregnated. You can also put vegetation in down in that part. You can put leaves and even a little bit of the dirt from the upper layer that's got a lot more of the site appropriate mycorrhiza.
Okay, very good. Someone is asking about, they've got a cremation all arranged, but no places to put their ashes yet. So how do we arrange to be interred there with the ashes?
Okay, well, Kimberly takes care of that. They can go to our website that we're hoping to redo. We've been talking about for 5 years, and Kimberly takes care of that. We do take, with the ashes, we mix them with a buffer, and it has organic material in it. The problem with ashes is they're pretty darn toxic. They've got a lot of sodium, and they're extremely alkaline. So there's a guy that's, Let Your Love Grow, which is not a great name, I don't think, but he has a product that we use that you mix and dilute the ashes with, and then we generally don't do we don't keep people in any kind of box. We'll turf off a square foot, maybe a little less than that, a little more than that, take it off and mix the stuff up and then put it down and then put the turf back on it. And we've had good success with that as far as the plants, because it does have a lot of calcium in our woods. A lot of our special plants seem to like calcium. And we have these mafic rocks. We're pretty close to the Brevard zone, and we probably have a little bleed over. The Brevard zone, I'm familiar with that, but it's a little lens of metasedimentary rocks. The special thing about Buzzard's Roost is it has the only marble outcrops in South Carolina, and that's only about 4 miles away. So it's probably the reason we get a lot of these plants that seem to be like circumneutral conditions, like the hexaletris and some of the other plants. Yeah. But yeah, just call Kimberly and she takes care of it.
Okay. Can you give us your website?
Yes, www.memorialecosystems.com. and Kimberly killed me because she sent me her business card. I was going to put it at the end so people could have it if they needed it, and I got busy watching Netflix and forgot to do it. But anyways, Kimberly Campbell, and the numbers are there, the contact numbers, but memorialecosystemsoneword.com.
Okay, that'll work. And another question about the process. Do you purchase the interment rights in advance, and what does the price include with what kind of options? And can you, as far as a donation, can you specify how it will be used?
Yeah, okay. Well, as far as it goes, the interment rights do depend on where it is. It's kind of like some people say they want to be able to hear the creek, you know, like whatever. The ones, and most of the ones near the creek in the old section are sold out, but there are some certainly that have up the slope that have creek view, especially in the winter. And those are a little bit more, I don't have the price list with me, but it's around $3,000. The total cost of the funeral is typically less than half of what it is for a regular funeral. And it depends on how much the family does. You know, it is legal in South Carolina to take care of your own dead. And there are some funeral homes that will help you along a little bit, but let the family do more. So for instance, you can get a transport permit from the coroner. If someone's got a van, you don't have to pay the funeral. You don't even have to include a funeral home. You can just come directly to the place, but you do have this transport permit from the coroner. And you have to be careful working with funeral homes. We have some that we like to work with because we feel like they've got fair prices and they're not gouging and can help along. But typically, people are going to a whole body burial today costs $12,000. I mean, and that's if you don't get the King Tut sarcophagus to go in the ground, the vault. So it's all the things you don't buy, and we charge typically $500 to open and close the graves. A lot of cemeteries will give you a $400 cemetery plot, and then they charge you $1,000 or $1,200 to open and close the grave, and they charge you another $800 to place the bronze marker. We provide the stone, and we have a carving thing, and there is a small fee for carving the stone, but the stone is basically included. Revegetation, which could include some ferns and plants, and if people want to help, is also included. If you want something really fancy, or you want, gee, I would really like this grave to have a lot of special plants, then yeah, people could do donations specifically for that. But again, we're real flexible with what we do here. Kimberly is the opposite of hard sell. Someone will call up and they'll call back and say, "No, I really want to give you money." And Kimberly will say, "Well, have you thought about it long enough?" You know, so we're not, we're not exactly the best cemetery salespeople in the world, because again, we're running a nature preserve where we bury people, not a cemetery.
So is Kimberly your wife or daughter or what?
Kimberly's the wife. She's an English person. I told you that all those people, my family's been in Western South Carolina since the 1780s. The Pickens clan, Pickens County, we were the poor relations, and I kept introducing people as relatives, and she said, "Well, the only reason you married me so you could be outside your bloody gene pool."
So what's the capacity of grave sites in the 78 acres, and how are they chosen?
Well,
can you choose your own spot?
Yeah. And people can, by the way, buy ahead of time, and Kimberly has a payment plan. There's, that they can pay a little bit a month, and they can pick their spot out. Usually, you have to walk with Kimberly if you want to do that. And again, it's like a walk in the woods. It's not a hard sell kind of thing. It's just showing you what's out there and what's available. And Kimberly's gotten a lot better at the plants. Nice thing about, bird watching is tough. They move, but plants pretty much don't move that much. They stay in the same place, so you can learn. Here's where you see the this plan. Here's where you see that plant. So that would be is the way you do it. You call Campbell up. Now, also, if something happens and people are thinking about it, it's nice to write down that that's what you would want to do, even if you don't want to pre-purchase. If you say that you want a place, if let your family know where there's aren't arguments after the fact. And sometimes, like if someone has died, we had this happen with a child died of brain cancer, and we were out of town. They went around with a face and did FaceTime, and we picked a place out that way. And sometimes, if it's people from far away, they'll say, if you'll just pick a place, I'd like to be in the grassland, or I'd like to be in the woods, etc. But there's another part of that question I've forgotten. Anyway.
Well, the capacity of the
the capacity. Yeah, well, in the old section, we only have room for 1,500. Under our easement, it's 1,500 whole body burials. We probably are, as far as the whole body, we don't have a limit on cremated remains because of just the very, very low impact. We talked to Upstate forever that we probably need to negotiate that. So after Kimra and I are gone, someone doesn't come in there and do something really stupid with cremated remains. The section is not open yet. It's got a lot of wetlands, but it also has a lot of uplands. Fortunately, 30 years ago, the owners of that property, that was the really, Ramsey Creek, despite all of its plants, was the cutover. It had been recently logged back in the 70s. And that was the older growth, and it was absolutely beautiful. So they hired a guy who gave them some pretty bad advice that they need to clear cut and then bulldoze all the duff and everything into big piles and burn it, and then plant loblolly pine. So we've eliminated the loblolly pine on the uplands. The kind of the floodplain is where all the really cool stuff is. So up there, since it's going to be a restoration project with a good bit of grassland restoration, because I'm very interested in grasslands. We have found, by the way, a lot of Indian artifacts when we dig graves. Cobridge Road was on the maps was an Indian road, a pathway. And of course, it looks like a hunting camp because we found lots of scrapers and lithic industries, as well as projectile points, including some that you can see through that are made out of quartzite. So there's some really beautiful things. But up there, we'll probably be putting more, instead of 50 per acre, it may be 250 per acre, because it is absolutely a blank slate. We're not worried about destroying things because it was destroyed. That's a restoration effort that's going to take several lifetimes, and we're aware of that. So that's the reason we have to get this all locked down with our easement. But yeah, we've got lots more upstream once we get it open. And I'd like to buy another 25 acres. There's another 25 acres I really want to buy. I am one of those people. I don't want all the land, just the land that joins mine.
I think we have three more questions. As I understood, you were the only one in South Carolina, or are there others, green burials in South Carolina?
There's one guy there's one guy in Columbia that has, it's a green burial project, but it's a backhoe in a field. He lets people do coping, lining the graves and plant exotics and everything. But the burial itself is green, because you got to remember there's green burial where you're not using vaults, you're not using all these chemicals and everything. But you're not really, doesn't have a higher conservation purpose. And there's another one, I don't even know if the guy, Kimberly just walked by. She told me, Dust to Dust is the name of that project. So it is green. And there's another one that's very controversial in Greenville County right now, but it's bad news. We don't really associate with that guy. He's been in the newspapers. I'll leave it at that.
All right. One question about pets, about being buried with family plots, or if the pet dies before the family does? How does that work?
We take pets, and actually, you can be buried with your pet next to you. We figure that at Ramsey Creek, I find skulls all the time. So why should we have say, well, only cats and dogs? They're pets, but we can have otters and squirrels and skunks and everything else die there, and we find their skulls. But so we feel that it's completely appropriate to do. We do have a section for pets, but but you can be buried with your pet. Here, don't do this. Don't do this.
And then how about general visitors? Can people come and look around and decide what they want to do?
I'm sorry, I missed that.
Can general visitors are allowed to come and explore around and decide what they'd like to do?
Dawn to dusk is open. Obviously, if it's really bad weather, like tornadoes and stuff, don't go. But yeah, the trails are open. There's trail maps. You can get online. We have several miles of trails that people can walk on. If you want to walk and look at plants in the spring, we actually do. This year we didn't because of COVID. But next year we're hoping maybe we'll have a vaccine and we can lead some wildflower hikes and show anybody who wants to come. But yeah, if you come in for small groups or individuals, it's very easy to social distance. And so if you want a guided tour, fine. But if you just want to come up and walk around, that's fine too. Just to stay out after dark. We had some people from Florida that read about us and they came up and it got to be after dark, and my father-in-law called us cars there, and I was just afraid someone had fallen, hitting their head. And so I put on my headlamp and went out in the woods calling for people, and it turned out that they were down by the creek being amorous, and so I disturbed them and said, "Yeah, you're not allowed here after dark. You have to kind of clear out." So yeah, but just don't be there after dark. I have to come looking for you.
All right, last question, I believe, is do you have a conservation easement on that, and who holds that if you do?
Yeah, it's Upstate Forever, and it actually is the first of its kind. It's a model for some of the other projects. They actually, usually land trusts don't like to do, or easement holders don't like to do process-based. They don't want to be there to say, okay, you can only plant these kind of plants and the density and all these other issues. But Brad Weish is a friend, and they agreed to do it. And so they hold the easement. They come out and inspect us twice a year, which is, I think they have fun doing it. So yeah, Upstate Forever holds our easement.
All right.
Well, okay.
Well, great. That was, I learned a lot, and I appreciate your time and effort. And I just wanted to make one general announcement, and I'll turn it back over to Virginia. But my announcement was that on October the 12th at Devil's Fork State Park, we are going to have a mimosa murder party, which we're going to try to get rid of a few mimosas. So I'll be the contact person if you want to join us with that. We'll supply several tools and equipment for that. This is sponsored by the Friends of Joe Cassie at Devil's Fork State Park. And it is a prelude to the Native Plant Week. It's the reason we're doing this thing. So Devil's Fork State Park, October 12th. Virginia, you want to close us?
Well, I'll close just simply by saying we're adjourned.
Thank you, everybody. We'll try to get this up on the website as soon as possible. See y'all next month.